Everyone has a personal worldview. This personal worldview is relevant as a personal vision of life or as a way of life, as Van der Valk states. When a personal worldview is that important to everyone, it is actually kind of strange that there's hardly any attention paid to personal worldview when we educate student teachers for their profession. Especially when you realize that a personal worldview helps to give meaning to a student teacher's life and profession, helps the student teacher to know how to act, why, and when. One of the main reasons that we students as well as teachers do not seem to have a common language for our personal worldview. We live in a secular age where it seems that a personal worldview is interesting as a relic, but not something that should have a place in education. We're not used to talking about our personal worldviews. And help me out here, what is a personal worldview? In the 4 years of student teacher education, of course, students think about what is important to them, why they want to be a teacher, how they can be a teacher, what are their ideals, their dreams, and what do they hope for their pupils. And the years of studying are also the years that you try to develop your own identity. So this study aims to follow 15 to 20 students for 3 years to see how they learn to articulate their worldview and how they use this in their professional identity as a teacher. In 3 years, I will conduct 4 studies. The first one will be a conceptual study, where I will define professional identity, personal worldview, and articulation. Also, I will address the question, what personal worldview can add to the profession of an aspiring teacher. In the first empirical study, which will be my second study, will be a study on what images student teachers have on personal worldview, if they can articulate their personal worldview, and what their ideas are on personal worldview as part of their professional identity. In my second empirical study, which we study 3, students will write their own personal worldview narrative based on different impressions they have collected in the course of 2 courses on personal worldview education. For the third and final empirical study, students will collect examples during their final internship of moments where they acted upon their personal worldview and moments where pupils brought in their personal worldview topics. Next, they will use all of these experiences and ideas to articulate their professional identity, or better, their personal interpretive framework, as was designed by Kelchtemans. All of the 3 empirical studies will, the method I will use will be interviews, semi-structured interviews, that I will analyze, of course. But for now, I will focus on the first study, that will be the conceptual study. In educational sciences, there has been little attention paid to personal worldview, mainly because the effects cannot be measured and or because personal worldview is associated with religion, where a divine being tells you what to do. Research will show that personal worldview is in fact very relevant for the profession, not in the way that a divine being will tell you what to do, but as a view of life and a view how to act in life. Also, educational science pay attention to forming a professional identity, and this research will show that personal worldview will enrich that personal interpretive framework in the educational sciences. But for a personal worldview to be relevant, there's 3 things that will be important First of all, for student teachers, it will be important that their personal worldview will become a conscious personal worldview. That student teachers, secondly, will learn to articulate their personal worldview. And third and last, that their personal worldview can only be relevant for the student teacher's profession if they learn to integrate their personal worldview in their personal interpretive framework. And this will lead to the research question: how do student teachers develop their personal worldview articulation in order for them to integrate their personal worldview in their personal interpretive framework? This study will be a theoretical study. It will explore insights from other scholars on personal worldview and related subjects like flow, religion, transcendence, beliefs, ideals, maybe presence, etc. It will also explore insights of other scholars on professional identity, education in a secular age, the relevance of a personal worldview, and a way a personal worldview can be articulated. We will have three sub-questions. First is, how can a personal worldview, religious or secular, of student teachers be relevant or even necessary for forming a professional identity? The second sub-question will be, what are the differences and similarities between personal worldview and the personal interpretive framework? And the third will be, how can student teachers articulate their personal worldview? The theoretical relevance of this study will be that personal interpretive framework, as described by Kelchtemans in the study Who I Am and How I Teach, is the message. I believe that this theory needs to be expanded by the notion of personal worldview. The practical relevance of this study will be that student teachers will learn to articulate their personal worldview as to become a better teacher. First, in the way that they learn to act, but also to pay attention to all the personal worldview questions and themes, issues that their pupils will bring up, because we have noticed that teachers often do not even recognize and certainly not adjust these issues that their pupils bring up. For now, I think that the main issue I would like to discuss with you is, what do you think? How do you think that attention for personal worldview can make a student teacher a better teacher? I hope we have a great discussion.